people realize that when they are not happy, then they can protest. And lastly, listeners, we now speak to Peter Setou of Vumelana, an organization that aims to help people that have acquired land. Since the dawn of our democracy, some South Africans, especially small-scale farmers, have had the opportunity to have access to land, but unfortunately have not been able to make good use of it, to make profit of it, because of many things. Access to information, access to funding, and all of those things have hindered people from making good use of the land that they have had. Now, information is very important, and if you are concerned about land, which I hope that all of us are at this point in time in our democracy, then pay attention, because you might just learn a lesson as to where to go if you want to get help in managing your land. Here is Peter Setou from the organization Vumelana. Mr. Setou, can you first tell us about your organization, Vumelana? Who are you guys?
Vumelana is a non-profit organization that helps communities or beneficiaries of land reform to develop their land. We do this through funding advisory services to structure commercially viable partnerships between beneficiary communities on the one hand and the investors on the other, so that much needed jobs can be created, income can be created, and skills can be developed and transferred to these communities. Our work is actually complementary to what government is doing in developing rural communities and ensuring productive use of restored land.
Now, how is your relationship with the government in terms of doing this work?
Well, Vumelana is a non-profit organization. We have a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform. We do support them from time to time. The department does also refer some of the projects to us so that we can assist those communities to mobilize investments, private investments. What Vumelana actually does is to assist the communities to mobilize private investments so that the land, or rather the restored land, can be put to productive use. Vumelana did, or rather sponsored these scenarios and compiled a team of about 40 people with widely differing perspectives, from your policymakers to administrators, traditional leaders, communal property institutions, your activists, your academics, your landowners, etc. We pulled together this team so that they could have discussions around what the future of land reform could look like by 2015. Because the scenarios are stories and it's fiction, they support informed debate without committing anyone to any particular policy position. They enable us to deal with the fact that whilst we cannot predict or control the future, we can work with and influence it. So the team, just in a nutshell, came up with the 4 scenarios. The first scenario being connection and capture. And this first story unfolds as the ruling party tries to show up support ahead of the 2019 election. By acceding to traditional leaders' demands for control of land in communal areas, they hope to mobilize votes. The party survives the 2019 elections. According to this story, some traditional leaders use their new power to develop their people. However, others use this to enrich themselves. And at the same time, the number of restitution claims exceeds expectations. Weak institutions allow the politically connected to capture land reform for their own expenses. The outcome of this scenario is that land reform is actually captured by the well-connected to the detriment of the majority of South Africans. That is the first scenario. The second scenario is market power and concentration. It develops as the government seeks private sector partners to accelerate land reform. Surveys show that more land has been transferred to black farmers through the market than previously understood. So community-private partnerships are showing good results. Incentive packages are developed to encourage partnerships in this scenario. Support programs are set for black commercial farmers. The mechanisms are developed to draw private finance into the land reform program. The outcome of this scenario is that while there has been some strides, however, there are still some challenges, especially with regard to communal areas which still remain underdeveloped, and small farmers still remain without support. So that was the second story. The third story, or rather scenario, is what we call occupation and confiscation. It turns on a failure by the leaders to agree on a viable strategy. Instead, they blame one another for South Africa's woes. There's a countrywide campaign for land invasion in the face of deepening hardship. The government, according to this story, sides with the opposition parties to allow confiscation without compensation. This move, according to this story, backfires spectacularly by 2030. The ruling party has lost power. Land is in the hands of black South Africans, but the constitutional framework for dealing with the land is gone, since the constitution had to be amended to allow for confiscation without compensation, and this leads to more uncertainties. That is the third story. The last story, and the final one, is hard bargaining and compromise. This is triggered by rising pressure and declining resources. The government is driven to reconceptualize and relook at the land reform program as a pro-poor initiative with incentives designed to really push and channel the resources towards of the private sector, most importantly, and civil society into the program. In terms of this scenario, not everyone has got it his way or their way. Neither do other interest groups, as compromises are hammered out. By 2030, land ownership is more widely spread, and small-scale commercial farmers are developing alongside larger farming enterprises. That's, in a nutshell, the four scenarios.
And of course, these, Mr. Setou, are not predictions, but narratives of what could happen by 2030.
Yes, indeed. These are not predictions. They remain what they are. They remain scenarios. It's just what could potentially happen by 2030. This is based on what this group of 40 people who were assembled actually felt,
Yes.
Now, the most important thing about the scenarios is that in each and every scenario, you get what the pros and cons are for every particular scenario.
Now, as an organization that works with land reform beneficiaries, can you take us through some of the challenges maybe that you face in this work?
One of the biggest challenges or rather a dilemma that faces the process of land reform is that it has proceeded too slow to satisfy the post-liberation expectation. Much of the land that has been transferred to communities has become economically active. We have situations where productive assets which were bought by government have now become desolate. Workers have lost their jobs, and the local economy actually got affected. This has often led to instability and resentment amongst the beneficiaries of among the beneficiary communities. Now, Vumelana has, as a result, identified a need to assist in resolving some of these challenges that leads to high failure rate of land transferred through supporting such communities to mobilize much needed investments to ensure that the restored land is productive.
Now, when you look at it, is the land reform process failing, or is it succeeding in it in what it would like to achieve?
If one looks at the report that government has actually provided itself, one gets a sense that there's been a number of significant challenges that government has had to go through. And I mean, there are a myriad of factors as to why there are these challenges, ranging from the fact that the resources are not infinite. There's a huge demand on the government's fiscus, from your social grants to your, the famous feast must fall. All of these actually rely on just one pot, this government funding. Now, it has become very clear, and I think there's a realization within government that government cannot go it alone. There's also a realization among the private sector players that there's a key and critical role that they need to play in order to ensure that land reform is a success. As Vumelana, we try to demonstrate the benefit of community-private partnerships as a contribution towards successful land reform.
Now, these are beneficiaries. Are there voices in terms of the challenges that they face in making a success of being beneficiaries of land reform ahead?
Well, I think largely the lamentations from the beneficiaries of land reform are being heard, and I mean, if one looks at the current and you read the news, you get a sense that government has actually recognized the fact that there are challenges within the land reform space, and they are trying to come up with ways and means through which this could be checked up.
Do you believe that there is enough support for them, that is the land reform beneficiaries?
As Vumelana, we do believe that there's a lot that can actually be done to ensure that beneficiaries of land reform get the requisite support. And as I've said, we don't think this is an area that government can play. This is not a space that we believe that other sector players need to get involved in order to make this work. Not only government, the private sector, civil society, and by the way, the land reform beneficiaries themselves, because frequently you'll find that there are lots of infightings among the land reform beneficiaries. These are the issues that, for example, the leadership of the communal property institutions or communal property associations needs to confront and actually make sure that they address some of these issues, because if there is instability, you will find that government is less likely to actually come and assist and put resources there. And as for the investors, where there is uncertainty or where there are infightings, they are less likely to actually put their money there and actually invest into such projects.
Can you give more light or shed more light on how the community-private partnerships work?
Well, typically how we do it as Vumelana is that we are approached by beneficiaries. We could be approached by a beneficiary community, or for that matter, even a government department. Sometimes we are even approached by the private sector. Private landowners who would approach us to say, "Dear Vumelana, we would lead. Can you please assist us with, negotiating or putting this deal together, etc." So we would receive those funding for those applications for funding from the communities or government departments or advisors or investors. Then we'll enter into a cooperation agreement with the community, setting out the basis of the relationship between the community, for example, and Vumelana. We would then appoint a transaction advisory team to structure an agreement in terms of which the community makes the land available and the investor undertakes to finance or manage the operation. The transaction advisory team, which is typically a combination of your financial, legal, deal structuring, and community facilitation, they've got those sets of skills. They would procure proposals from potential investors which show how the land will be developed to create jobs, income, and skills, and other benefits of the community. Once the agreement is signed, the investor will reimburse Vumelana for the cost incurred by the transaction advisory team in putting the deal together. It is important to know that the community never pays a cent out of this. And also it is important to note that if the deal is not successful, we take the knock as Vumelana. That is why we are there. We take that risk. If the deal, the investor will only reimburse Vumelana if the deal has been successful. Once we get the the reimbursed funds, we will use some of these funds to finance support for communal property institutions for a period, for a specified period. And this would be to assist them with things like making sure that they've got sound financial administration, they produce audited financial statements on an annual basis, etc. They develop policies, etc., to make sure that those challenges that we talked about around good governance are actually addressed.
So is there a need, Mr. Setou, to educate land reform program beneficiaries about these things?
I think there is merit. It is important to educate South Africans in generally and beneficiaries of land reform in particular about the policies that are in place and how they can benefit. To also, educate them about, give them some case studies, for example, to say, this is what has happened in a specific area. This is how this community turned around their farm so that it stays productive, etc. We find it that with more information and educated and informed beneficiaries, they get wiser and they're able to take, well thought out decisions.
Is there anything that can still be done for those beneficiaries who managed to get their hands on the land but the project failed?
Well, that's the reason why organizations such as ours are there. We tend to support those organizations who've received their land and they don't have the technical know-how, nor the finances for that matter, or the funds to work the land.
Lastly, Mr. Setou, how can those who will be listening and interested to get their hands on your help get hold of Vumelana?
Those who are interested to get in touch with Vumelana, they may contact us on our landline, which is 011-612-2000. They can also visit our website, which is www.vumelana.org.za.
So those are the contact details. If you have further questions in as far as where to go and what to do with your land, if you're one of those people that does not have a borehole, you do not have water, or you do not know what to do with whatever you are producing, or you just need guidance in terms of the work that you're doing on that land so as to be more productive, Vumelana is one of those organizations that will gladly help. So make sure that you get in touch with them. On that note of land, this is where we're going to leave it for tonight, listeners. And from my side, Via Mukhashula, until next time, good night.